Think of the Daily Mail. Does the phrase reliable news source spring to mind? I didn't think so. But now they've outdone themselves. The story begins with this headline. I was frozen to the spot in shock. It was said to intimidate. How a friendly chat in the ladies of a London pub turned menacing and plunged a Tory councillor, 22, into the clash between trans rights and women's safety. The article is written by this woman. Ruby Sampson is a Tory councillor for the ward of Cockfosters in London. She was at an event at the Marquis of Granby pub in Westminster last Wednesday when she needed to use the toilet. Here's what Sampson says happened next. Before heading home after a pleasant evening, I went to the ladies' loo, which has 2 cubicles. I emerged from mine at the same time as the woman next door, who, at about 6 foot tall, towered over me. She wore a skimpy top, which made her shoulders seem bigger, and she spoke with a strikingly deep voice. A trans woman. The lavatory was cramped, and I had to stand directly behind her while waiting to use the wash basin. I can't deny I was a bit scared, shocked rather. There was a sense of novelty. What would she be like? Well, we had quite a nice chat. Not exactly girly, but friendly. I thought, this is going well. I'm handling the situation fine. I didn't treat her any differently. Why would I? We spoke about the paucity of loo paper, the dreadful taps, and temperamental hand dryer. It was as she moved the door to leave that it happened. I remarked that we had no choice but to awkwardly shake our hands dry. She turned to me and replied, I'm going to wipe my hands on my penis. With that, she disappeared. I'm going to wipe my hands on my penis. What does that even mean? It seems strikingly implausible, even to me. But that didn't stop the Daily Mail from running a whole story on the basis of one person's say-so, and letting its author draw some pretty grim conclusions. Sampson goes on. Now, I was frozen to the spot in shock. There is no doubt in my mind that this was a threat of sorts. Why would you assert the fact that you had a penis in a female single-sex space? I felt like I had been flashed as the penis image was put in my mind by her announcement. It was said to intimidate. The cloak's proximity made it much scarier still. What if she turned violent? It would be 10 minutes before my friends realised I was missing. Hey, Ruby, it could have been an hour, who knows? So we started from a strange comment attributed to a trans woman who was a total stranger, and we've ended up in the middle of a fantasy of intimidation, threats, and even violence. Now, these are pretty strong associations to make, and they're published in a national newspaper without any sources or witnesses to back the accounts up. You'd think this is basic journalism. Apparently not. And none of us would be any the wiser about any of this were it not for this woman. This is a Twitter user called Sophie from Mars. She's also an established streamer and video essayist with over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. She posted her own account of what happened on social media. I went to the Brianna J. vigil outside the Department for Education the other day, Wednesday, and then we, about 8 friends, went to a pub that we haven't been to before in the Westminster area. Super Tory, weird anti-Semitic conversation going on between some dudes outside. At one point, I went to the bathroom upstairs, and the ladies' room was absolutely tiny and just generally a bit shit. The stall I went in had no loo roll, so when I stepped out, I had to say to the cis woman who was coming out of the other stall that I needed to go in there for that. Because I'd had to talk to her in order to explain that, we made kind of awkward small talk about the bathroom in general, as we both washed our hands, and then she said something like, we'll have to shake. And I paused for a sec to understand she meant to dry our hands, and then I said, oh, I'll just wipe my hands on my jeans. Oh, I'll just wipe my hands on my jeans. That makes a lot more sense. So much sense, you suspect it's almost certainly true. Now, we're not saying that Sampson is deliberately lying. In fact, Sophie had a better explanation for what happened. Just taking some time to process that I've been possibly anonymously sexually harassed in a national newspaper because this Tory dumbass couldn't think about anything else when she saw a trans woman besides dick. Pretty weird. It would be bad enough if Sampson had just vented her transphobia in a right-wing rag. But she went even further by getting politicians involved. Sampson has written to Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch, and the letter pretty much replicates the Daily Mail article, but I'll read just this bit out. Sampson writes, and I quote, "How society is progressing, I don't feel safe going to a female bathroom alone. I fear that these incidents will become more and more frequent with no way of having any consequences for the improper use of single sex spaces. Yes, perhaps completely fictitious incidents like this will become more frequent, but that won't be the fault of trans women.
I think it tells you exactly what Bernie Sanders discussed on, I believe it was Sophie Ridge this Sunday, which is people should be angry. People should feel scared because their rights are being eroded, they're being made poorer. But instead of that anger being directed towards its true and honest source, it's being misdirected towards people who are just as vulnerable as you, if not in some instances more vulnerable. So, migrants, asylum seekers, trans people, gay people, people of color. That is where your anger is being directed. And in order to sustain a moral panic like that, particularly when very little risk is posed by transgender women, particularly when you compare the risk posed by transgender women to the risk posed by cisgender men, you end up having to have an astonishingly low threshold for what constitutes an article worthy atrocity. So let's just take this story step by step. Number one, Councillor Ruby Sampson of Cockfosters Ward says that even to hear the word penis is kind of like a psychic flashing. Put the image of a penis in your brain. Well, look, if the very word penis is that distressing for you, I would recommend standing for a different ward, one not named Cockfosters. All right, just a word of advice. Secondly, if I had thought to myself, did someone just say this incredibly bizarre thing? I would go, what other words does this sound like? Is it, I'll just wipe my hands on my penis? Now, I don't have a penis, but I don't think that absorbent, Aaron. Or would it be something that sounds maybe a little bit like penis, like jeans? I would probably go for that. And if I was a journalist choosing whether or not to report on this story, to publish this story, to edit this story, I would go, okay, is there any is there any corroboration of this? I mean, this sounds like a really, really bizarre thing to happen.
Yeah.
So I feel incredibly sorry for Sophie from Mars. I know that she wasn't named in the article, but I think that it's pretty atrocious that she's had to, you know, she's had to do like a multiple tweet thread explaining what is just an innocuous interaction in a bathroom, not for her own sake, because obviously nobody would have known it was her in the first place, but for the sake of her community, for the sake of the marginalized demographic of which she is a part. Because the more you have these stories, which are based on either a flimsy pretext or a totally made up one in the public sphere, the more heightened the risk of violence or really horrible, regressive, reactionary policymaking. So even if you're not named, you must feel a sort of duty to put the record right, even though you're then stepping into a limelight and at risk of all this horrendous abuse by online transphobes. I really, really do feel for her. And I also think that there is something really specific about transphobia that I've been trying to get my head around for a long time, and it's this idea of body horror. So because the body of the transgender person, and in particular the transgender woman, is constructed into such a figure of disgust and horror and repulsion, I think it genuinely scrambles people's brains a bit. And it means that you can't just have a normal encounter with somebody of the kind that you would have pretty much every single day. Like, oh yeah, there's no loo roll in there, without going, oh my God, what is under your clothes? And that's not something that I think very often about anybody. I don't think it about cisgender women. I don't think about transgender women. I don't think about cisgender men, of course, unless they are very good looking. But this emphasis on body horror, like it's so profoundly antisocial, and it makes women, it mischaracterizes us, and it kind of smears us like we're these, prurient busybodies who, are constantly thinking about what's in somebody's trousers when we're not. I mean, the other thing that comes up a lot is, oh well, what about you know there can't be penises in public toilets. Well, the thing is that I don't see anybody's genitals in a public toilet. If I see anybody's genitals, regardless of whether it's a penis or a vagina, something has gone very, very wrong. something has gone very, very wrong. The ladies' toilet is not this kind of like mystic bacchanal where we've all got like, a breast out and like, massaging wombs all over the place. Like you go into your cubicle, you do your business, you wash your hands, you go. Maybe you make a comment on the fact the hand dryer doesn't work. That's it. But the transphobic moral panic has us examining these really banal details of our everyday lives and trying to make us afraid and unreasonable. And that's not freeing for women. There are very real things in this world that we should be scared of and concerned about. But, you know, let's at least distinguish between the made up shit and the real shit. Just at the very least for my sanity.